Understanding the sources of honesty is fundamental to shed light on corporate misconduct. Professor Rajna Gibson of the Geneva Finance Research Institute, part of the University of Geneva, has conducted an experiment to study the interaction between social norms and preferences for truthfulness. Professor Gibson, good afternoon. Welcome to the studio.
Good afternoon.
Professor Gibson, what were the objectives of your research and what is the methodology that you have used?
So the broad objective of our research is trying to understand whether people are really homo economicus who just care about their personal profits, or whether they are also moral people who also value honesty. And in this particular experiment, we look at how their preferences for honesty interact with social norms. So what are social norms? They describe set of behaviors that are accepted or not accepted by society. So you have norms about how you eat, you have norms about how you drive, how you recycle, and you have also corporate norms. And what we want to see here is whether social norms lead people who are very moral to act in an honest way, or if they resist the norms because maybe it drives their control aversion. That's basically the key of the experiment. So how do we do that? We take 261 students from the University of Zurich, men and women. We put them in a lab and in the situation of a CEO. The CEO can announce the earnings per share of the company. He can choose to announce the true earnings per share, which is low, or manipulate the earnings per share, do what is called earnings management. If he manages the earnings per share goes up, the stock price goes up, his personal bonus goes up. That's basically the story. So we vary the cost of telling the truth, that means of announcing the true earnings per share. And we also put the CEO in front of different, so we spread the students in 3 groups. One group has no social norm. One group has a bad social norm, which says everybody manages the earnings, so you should just manage the earning. And one group is confronted with a good social norm, which says people dislike, shareholders don't like this earnings management behavior, you should refrain from acting this way. Then we measure people's preferences for honesty. We have questionnaires to do that, to say whether they're very moral or very immoral. And finally, the important point to notice is that we actually pay the students, and we pay them less if they choose the true option, the truthful option.
So what are the key findings of this?
So the key findings is that if you believe in standard economic theory, everybody should lie. Everybody should announce the false earnings per share, which is high, which is 35 cents per share, and maximize his variable bonus. Still, that's not what we find. We find that in 33% of the cases, people actually tell the truth. And actually what you see in this graph is on the pink line are the people with high preferences for honesty. You see that even when the cost of telling the truth gets very high, there's still about 60% of these people who continue to tell the truth. The bottom dotted line is the line of what I would call the more opportunistic people. These people react very strongly to financial incentives, and when it hurts them too much, they start to cheat. So what is the message? Highly motivated people by honesty have greater trade-off resistance to financial incentives. The next thing that we do is we look at social norms. And what we find is, first of all, most people tend to act like sheep. That means if there's a good norm, they're going to increase the percentages of truth-telling. They're going to increase the number of people who tell the truth. So it increases from 33% to 47%. And if there's a bad norm, the percentage of people who tell the truth is going to decline up to 20%. But again, the interesting story is that those people who have strong preferences for honesty, they resist the good norm and they resist the bad norm. So the key message is that people who have strong preferences for honesty, they are trade-off resistant, they resist incentives, and they resist external pressure for social norms. We also try to explain why they behave in this way, and we think it's because of control aversion. These people don't like that their inner motivation is actually disturbed by external pressure, whether incentives or social norms induce this external pressure.
In what is this experiment different from other similar experiments?
So first of all, I think the setting that we employ, to my knowledge in experimental economics, we are the first to really use a very concrete corporate setting. We don't use abstract games. And this is the corporate setting of earnings management, which is a very common practice in the industry, in most industrial or financial services firms. And we try to really put students in the situation of CEOs who are confronted with real incentives to manipulate these earnings. And the second, I think, novelty is that I think our study is the first that looks at the interaction of people's preferences for honesty with social norms, external pressure. I think we're the first to do that.
And what does it teach the corporate world? How can it be useful to it?
So I think we do have some key messages for corporate governance very broadly, for hiring decisions among corporations, and for remuneration policy. So let me talk first about hiring decisions. Should people hire leaders with strong preferences for honesty? We think the answer is yes, because these people are less motivated by financial incentives to cheat, for instance. They're also less subject to conformity to social norms. They resist the norm, and that has a bright side. If you look at the department, let's say a trading department where there's a fraudulent climate or so, there's a bad norm in place, well, those people who have strong preferences for honesty will resist the bad norm, and you avoid contagion. So one message in terms of hiring policy is you should hire leaders with strong preferences for honesty. Now the question is, can you measure these preferences? The answer is yes. We do have questionnaires that do that. The second question is, will existing leaders in place want to hire these new, very moral people? Maybe not, because it can threaten their existing positions. The second contribution is about talking about all these debate on CEO remuneration policies. We think this is the wrong debate, because it looks too much at the human being as being only motivated by financial incentives. What we're saying is that people have intrinsic motivation to act with their values. And if you really hire people who have this inclination, then suddenly financial incentives become more secondary, and you can pay them with fixed wages rather than variable bonuses, and you can offer them lower wages. So it would somehow mitigate this whole escalation in the CEO bonuses. So does this mean that we believe, at least I think, that a corporate governance rooted in morality, in honesty, in terms of values in a corporation is a key? That means the leaders at the top have to have these strong preferences for truthfulness. But it doesn't mean that regulation becomes irrelevant, because remember, 33% on average do tell the truth, but 67% of us remain opportunists. And even a bigger number if you think that there is a bad norm in place. So that's the key message.
Professor Gibson, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.